So there's been this growing discussion of late regarding separating art from the artists, especially during the Me Too movement. There's been a lot of predatory behavior reported by these artists, and as a result, there's been this growing question of whether or not one can, or probably should, separate the art from the artist. I'm not going to go into the greater theories that have been guiding this discussion. Another guiding principle within terms of artists owning their work to a certain degree is obviously copyright theory. We won't be discussing copyright either. There are a lot of gorgeous, beautiful works that have fallen in the public domain, and those works were still created by an artist that had a full and rich life. Oftentimes these artists are worthy of discussion and can definitely be included in the discussion as to whether or not one can or should separate the art from the artist. We're going to table all of those discussions and instead discuss merely whether or not one can separate the art from the artist. Is it possible? Pragmatically speaking, do we have the ability to do that? Spoiler alert for the conclusion of the video, but my opinion is that one definitely can separate the art from the artist, but only in as much as the artist allows you to do that. Now, to demonstrate this fact, we're going to look at Mozart. Let's take an innocuous figure, more or less, as an example. That way we can table all the Me Too discussions for a bit. The works of Wolfgang Amadeus Mozart are beloved by a lot of people. Now, at this point, it is probably common knowledge to a lot of people that Mozart had a scatological interest. Basically, he liked poops and farts. This is a well-documented historical thing. That was his interest. Now, a lot of people who appreciate Mozart's etudes and concertos and symphonies and the like would not necessarily appreciate his scatological interests as much as he does. In fact, they probably wouldn't appreciate it very much at all. So this generally tends to be where people tend to argue for the separation of the art from the artist. We can appreciate his symphonies, we can appreciate his concertos and etudes without having to consider his scatological interests. And definitely, his scatological interests would be impolite to bring up while listening to Mozart's Requiem. The thing about Mozart, though, is that the more of his art you consume, the more you realize that his scatological interests are more or less inescapable. He wrote a lot of poetry about those fascinations of his, and poetry is indeed a form of art. A linguistic form of art, yes, but a form of art nonetheless. We have to make a decision as to whether or not we're going to censor or otherwise ignore his poetry in favor for his music. And that's what I mean. You can only separate the art from the artist only in as much as the artist allows you to. Artists tend to put a lot of themselves in their art. Their art tends to reflect, in no small way, much of the artist's own interests and personality. So it's no surprise that Mozart's less polite interests would show up in some of his art, this case in the form of poetry. Now again, I'm not going to discuss whether or not one should separate the art from the artist. We're simply asking, is it possible? And of course, people tend to ask this question only when they find something unfavorable about the artist. No one seeks to separate Mozart from his music for the reasons they like Mozart's music, for the reasons they're drawn to it. If it makes them happy, if it makes them feel joy or experience a wide range of emotions or things like that. That's generally speaking not the reason why we ask, can we separate the art from the artist? It's not the pleasant things we ask the question for, only the things that discomfort us. Everything else is fine.
Listen to me, you're not really a space ranger, you're a toy. We're all toys here.
At the turn of the millennium, John Lasseter released the movie Toy Story 2, sequel to his other movie Toy Story 1. Between these endeavors, he also directed A Bug's Life. One will notice that in a lot of John Lasseter's works that he made at Pixar Animation Studios, that there tends to be some men's locker room humor.
We've been down this aisle already.
We've never been down this aisle. It's pink.
Face it, we're lost.
Back it up, back it up.
What a great party!
Typically ribbing at or otherwise being told at the expense of women-coded characters in his movies. You know, things like Barbie dolls and Bo Peep.
I'm Tour Guide Barbie! Please keep your hands, arms, and accessories inside the car and no flash photography. Thank you!
I'm a married spud. I'm a married spud. I'm a married spud.
For the single fellas.
This difference is even more obvious when you compare the Pixar movies that were directed by John Lasseter to the Pixar movies that were not directed by John Lasseter. Compare this to Pete Docter's Monsters, Inc.
You know, I am so romantic sometimes I think I should just marry myself.
Give me a break, Mike.
What a night of romance I got ahead of me. Tonight is about me and Celia.
In that movie, we have a very prominent romantic couple with Mike Wazowski and Celia.
Oopsie boo.
Hey, Googly Bear, want to get going?
Do I ever? It's just that, there's a small...
I don't understand.
And despite there being a romantic thing going on with them and that situation just being ripe for men's locker room type of humor, even featuring a scene with two men in a locker room discussing Mike's girlfriend, we don't hear any of that humor. As a matter of fact, a lot of it's very, very wholesome.
You know, pal, she's the one. That's it. She is the one.
I'm happy for you.
Oh, and thanks for hooking me up with those reservations.
Oh, no problem. They're under the name Googly Bear.
Oh, good idea. You know, that wasn't very fun. So get this, as if dinner wasn't enough. I'm taking her to a monster truck rally afterwards.
Nice.
What's on your agenda?
I'm gonna head home and work out.
I mean, yeah, there's still humor, but none of it's at the expense of the woman. It's all, it's all very, very inviting, very wholesome, It's Googly Bear and Schmoopsy Poo. It's a couple calling each other by their pet names. And honestly, those are just relationship goals, and we're all here for it. None of these jokes are at the expense of the woman or even the man. They're just, we're all just kind of just basking joyfully and humorously in the relationship that these two have. And this is in stark contrast to things like John Lasseter's Toy Story 2.
I'm a married spud. I'm a married spud. I'm a married spud.
For the single fellas.
These are clearly sexual coded jokes made at the expense of the feminine coded Barbie doll character. And yeah, okay, so these jokes are a little raunchier. They're maybe not too raunchy, but they're a little raunchier compared to the normal affair, I suppose, especially again compared to other Pixar movies directed by other directors, but it can't be that bad, can it? And then we find out that John Lasseter has a long storied history of just being a creep to women. Very much in a predatory fashion. He would put his hands in places where he should be asking first, and he never would. He would use his power as president of Pixar Animation Studios and as director of a lot of these movies, or producer of a lot of these movies, to gain access to these female artists in order to do things. Suddenly this makes the locker room-ish humor a little more distasteful than it was before. But, okay, can we separate the art from the artist? Can we just appreciate, or at least acknowledge, maybe not appreciate, but acknowledge the humor for what it is, and, come to terms with the fact that there's better, more balanced humor in the other movies. Maybe. And then you get to the blooper reels.
Marker. And action.
It's your choice, Woody. You can go back, or you can stay with us and last forever.
Good heavens. Was that me? Oh my.
At this point, it was becoming tradition in Pixar Animation Studios to provide a bunch of blooper reels that would typically run in the credits of a second-run screening of the movie in theaters and would also be available on the DVDs, where when the credits roll, we would see these CGI animated characters flub their lines, miss their cues, miss their marks, all that sort of thing, just kind of goofing around on set in a way that is indicative of live-action filmmaking, and that would be part of the joke. Obviously, these are CGI characters, they wouldn't do that, but it definitely gives the movie a lot more character and a lot more, just a lot more life to it. One of these blooper reels catches a character by the name of Stinky Pete inviting two attractive twin Barbie doll figures to a private audition.
Good boy. Prospector, how about you?
And so you two are absolutely identical? You know, I'm sure I could get you a part in Toy Story 3. I'm sorry, are we back? Oh, all right, girls.
It very much is a bit too evocative of John Lasseter's creepy tendencies. Well, now we have to come to another decision like we did with Mozart. Do we remove these scenes? Do we remove this blooper reel from the movie, especially since it's aimed at children, or do we just leave it be? And in most cases, I would say we shouldn't censor it, that we should leave it be, but this is a movie made for children. Now, obviously I'm not going to claim that, people's misogyny would be inspired by John Lasseter or things like that, but, that's just not a vibe you want in these movies, regardless of whether or not they're considered repeatable behavior by children. So honestly, I don't know what to do, but Disney decided that they were going to remove that single blooper from the blooper reel section of Toy Story 2. So if you look on Disney+, if you look on any of the more recent home video releases on 4K Blu-ray, standard Blu-ray, or DVD, within the past couple years, you'll notice that scene, that one blooper, is removed entirely from the work. So again, should we separate the art from the artist? That is not something I'm going to answer or discuss really in this video. Can we remove the art from the artist? Yes, but only in as much as the artist allows you to do that. Regardless of whether or not you think you should separate the art from the artist, if you attempt to separate the art from the artist, you will ultimately end up having to make a decision in several cases whether or not to remove, censor, or just otherwise ignore entire swaths of an artist's work. So that's been my video. Thank you for watching. Remember, you're the only one that is capable of caring for yourself in a corporate business situation and have a lovely idea.